I'd like to ask you to follow along in your bulletin with me from the scripture reading in the Gospel of John, chapter 2. On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, standing, there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. And when the steward tasted the water that had become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. Yet you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. May God bless this reading as well as your hearing of this, the Holy Word. I'm one of those preachers who likes to come just a little bit closer to the audience. Come down off the pedestal, if you will. Try to make a little better eye contact. I'm also one of those preachers you may or may not have heard about, who put myself right in the midst of this story. So I'll be speaking as the bride at that wedding. I had spent my whole life preparing for my wedding feast. Yet not even in my wildest dreams could it have really been so grand. You know, when the tiresome duties of being a wife began to fill my days while drawing water or baking bread, I could look back again and again and remember the wonderful ways that God blessed me, my family, and my life. The day that Jesus performed that miracle that saved my wedding. In Palestine, weddings are supreme social occasions, for the overworked, underpaid, and heavily taxed. They're a time when people can relax and enjoy good food and good wine and hearty laughter together. Now, according to our law, the wedding of a virgin always takes place on a Wednesday. Yet the festivities last much longer. After the ceremony, we began the journey to our new home, and we were led through the village by the light of flaming torches with a canopy over our heads, taking the longest route possible, so as many people as could wish us well. And that night, our servants came again and again, bearing wine for the cups of our guests, until at one point they hesitated. And I wondered what was wrong. Rather than being eager to serve, they seemed embarrassed. And then I was embarrassed when I saw them offer our master of ceremonies only half of a cup. How dare they insult him that way? And then when I saw my husband's eyes meet the eyes of the steward, I knew we had no more wine. Oh no, I cried to myself, what can we do? Our guest will think we're stingy or foolish or both. See, for any Jewish feast, wine is absolutely essential. Now, it's not that our people ever get drunk. No, drunkenness is shameful. Actually, we use a mixture of 2 parts wine mixed with 3 parts of water. Yet still, anytime the host prevailed to provide for their guest, it's just a disaster because hospitality is a sacred duty. If the provisions of our wedding feast failed, it would be a terrible humiliation for our families. Yeah, what could we do? We didn't have any hidden skins of wine or, believe me, any money to go buy any more. So I did the only thing I could. I prayed. Help us, God. You are our only hope. How are we going to face our family and our friends if our wedding feast ends in disgrace? Somehow, God, let the end of this feast be just as bountiful as its beginning. Somehow. Well, I wasn't the only one who had seen alarm in the eyes of our steward. You know, Mary and Jesus had been watching me all night, just enjoying the glow of my happiness. And sitting as close as they were to me, I knew they had also seen the worry on my face. As I tried to catch my husband's attention, I moved a little closer to them, and I was horrified to hear Mary whisper to Jesus, "They have no more wine." Now, how did she know that? And some angel told her? Now, you'll just have to forgive my humor because Mary had been my mother's closest friend since childhood. And I knew all the miraculous stories about her, including the ones about Jesus' birth. She and my mother shared many secrets, so maybe my mother had told her somehow. But however she knew. And then she told Jesus. And it seemed as if she expected him to do something. Well, I was embarrassed and I was worried about what he would think. Yet I was even more surprised by his response. "Woman, how does this affect me? Has my hour come?" Now, he didn't really speak sharply or with anger or reproach as it was later rumored that he did. Actually, he spoke with gentleness, with love and respect, as if to say, "Oh, mother dear, just don't worry about it. You don't always have to know everything. Is this the right time and place? Don't worry. I'll take care of it, but in my own way, quietly." Still, he hesitated, knowing that if he did meet this need supernaturally, his life would never be the same. And indeed, it was true. After that, the small town seclusion that he'd enjoyed was forever lost. And over the next 3 years, his only time alone was in an olive grove before dawn or on a barren hill after dark. Fellowship with God came only at the expense of sleep because, you see, the needs of the people were so great. During the day, they pressed him from every side wherever he went, whether it was to the cities or the hillsides or the seashore. People and their needs were there. He was the topic of gossip among women and the object of debate among men. And with scribal precision, every jot and tittle of his teaching was tested against our rabbinical tradition. So I saw he needed to weigh his alternatives. I could see him wrestling with the situation. Maybe it was too soon to act. Most of his plans for ministry were still sort of like pencil sketches in his head, waiting for color and dimension from his Father. Oh yes, I mean his Heavenly Father. There was another time, when he hesitated, when he prayed, Father, if you're willing, let this cup pass from me, because it is so difficult to swallow. Yet we know he accepted it by saying, not my will, but thine be done. And just as he submitted to his Father in Gethsemane, he submitted to his mother in Cana. Turning from his own questions to the needs of those present who desperately needed the festive pleasure that this feast offered their lives. He turned his thoughts to our parents, knowing how frazzled they had been with all the preparations and how indebted they had become to provide this feast. And he turned his thoughts to us, knowing that being filled with shame and embarrassment was no way to start a marriage. We needed his help, and his heart went out to us. Mary watched, and when she knew he'd made a decision, she marched into the kitchen with confidence and authority, and she told those servants, you do whatever he tells you to do. Now, the 6 big jars at the door each held 20 to 30 gallons of water for our purification rites. Remember, our roads were not surfaced, and our sandals were merely soles attached to our feet by straps. So on a dry day, our feet were covered with dust, and on a wet one, with mud. That water was for washing our feet before we entered a home, and also for hand washing. See, strict Jews not only washed their hands before a meal, but between each course. See, the hand was held upright as water was poured over it to run down to the wrist, and then the hand was pointed down as the water was poured over it to run down to the fingertips. And then finally, each palm was cleansed by rubbing it with the fist of the other. And unless we followed these rituals, our hands were unclean. Jesus followed his mother to the kitchen and commanded that the jars be filled to the brim with water, nothing but water. And then he told the servants to draw some out and take it to the steward. And when our master of ceremonies tasted the water, which, having no idea at all where it had come from, water which was now wine, he was astonished. He called my husband over and jokingly said, most people serve the good wine first, and then after the guest palates are dulled a bit, then the inferior wine is served. You've served the best now. Without a word from his lips, without a touch from his hand, Jesus had willed that water into wine, performing a miracle to satisfy the needs of others, to save a couple of starry-eyed newlyweds from embarrassment, acting in sympathy, kindness, and love, using his power to save our wedding feast. Yet he did so much more than that day, because that was the day that he began to save me. That day, his presence and his power began to transform my life. That day, I began to believe Jesus was and is the Christ, the Son of the living God. That was the day I learned about the importance of faith, the abundance of God's grace, and basically how miracles happen. I learned about the importance of faith. See, Mary's faith was a strong, shining example of what I wanted in my life. Instinctively, she turned to Jesus when something went wrong. You know, whoever knows Jesus intimately instinctively turns to him when things go wrong. And you know, we never find him wanting. Even though Mary didn't know what Jesus was going to do, she still believed in him so much that she told the servants to do exactly what he said. Because she had the faith to trust. Even if she didn't understand everything involved, she may not have known what he was going to do, but she was sure he would do the best thing. Now, all of us have periods in our lives of fear and uncertainty when we can't see the way very clearly and we don't understand why those times come, and at the time we usually don't find much meaning or purpose in them. Yet blessed are those who have the faith to trust in Jesus even when they don't know or understand everything that's involved. I learned about the abundance of God's grace. As I said, each of those pots held 20 to 30 gallons. So when Jesus turned our water into wine, he gave us nearly 180 gallons. I mean, the point is, when Jesus' grace comes into our lives, there's always more than enough with some to spare. I mean, no wedding party on earth could drink 180 gallons of wine. And there's no need on earth that can exhaust the grace of God. There's a super abundance in it. You know, I need to tell you that what Jesus did for me that day in Palestine, he still wants to do today. It's not just that he turned water into wine. It's that whenever Jesus comes into our lives, a new quality comes too. It is a quality like water becoming wine. See, without Jesus, our lives are kind of like water. We're kind of flat and drab and tasteless. When Jesus comes into our lives, they become vivid and exciting and new. You know, if we're looking for a little bit of sparkle and exhilaration in our lives, then maybe we ought to consider being a true follower, disciple of Jesus Christ. Because the change is truly like turning water into wine. Most importantly, though, I learned how miracles happen. Now, miracles are a mystery, and we're naturally very curious about them. We'd like to know who's responsible and how many people are needed, that sort of thing. Now, some people say since miracles are God's business, that only God is needed. And others say since there's no such thing as a miracle, any questions are just meaningless. Yet the truth is, God needs workers for miracles. God needs miracle workers. The miracle at my wedding feast began with Mary's faith. Even if there were some things about her son that she still found puzzling, one thing was clear. She believed he could and he would save the day, and he did. The second major contributors were our servants. Now, I'm not sure if they were impressed with Jesus' authority or just intimidated by Mary's attitude. But whatever the case, they did exactly as they were told, which was remarkable. We have to remember, those pots were not containers of drinking water. They were containers of wash water. So when Jesus told our servants to take water from those jars to the steward, he was making a very daring request. Water in place of wine is one thing, but wash water? Those servants are the unsung heroes of the day. I marvel they would risk their jobs on such a reckless venture. It was only when the steward pronounced the wine something special that the miracle was complete. Yes, the power for the miracle came from Jesus, yet the miracle still belongs to Mary and our servants, because it couldn't have happened without Mary's insistence, and it wouldn't have happened at all without our servants. See, it just wouldn't have been appropriate for Jesus to take the wine to the steward himself as a guest. He was dependent upon our servants and their daring, almost foolhardy cooperation. And that, my friend, is the real stuff of which miracles are made. God hardly ever does a miracle without human help. God needs our daring, foolhardy cooperation. Now, God works with us in the daily routines of life, but we need to work with God to perform miracles. And sometimes we don't even know that a miracle has occurred. For instance, a Christian monk named Thalassius founded the first asylum for the blind. A Christian woman named Fabiola established the first hospital. And Apollonius, a Christian merchant, opened the first free drugstore. Now, they lived in a world where compassion was completely unknown. And the sick and the handicapped were just a burden to be ignored. It was a miracle that there were such people were driven by a spirit of unselfish love, because that kind of concern went completely against the tide. Yet God didn't do it alone. He needed Thalassius, Fabiola, and Apollonius, the servants, who bore the water, which Christ had turned to wine. Now, we live in a time when miracles are badly needed, yet are in pretty short supply. Because we're so trained to be skeptical, not only of God, but of our own impulses, that the miraculous has to struggle to be seen and heard. And that's why it's so important for Christians, those people who do believe in God and want to practice love and compassion and service, learn to be more sensitive and open to the possibility of miracles. How many prayers are left unsaid because we're so conditioned to expect nothing? And expecting nothing, then we ask for nothing, so we get nothing. How many ventures are not ever even begun because, we just don't have enough faith to dare? I have to wonder if too much of our living is the quality of a wedding feast that's run short of wine. Celebration and laughter have kind of faded into silence. Maybe we need a miracle to bring back real joy to our lives. And Jesus is waiting to perform a miracle to give us new life, new excitement and abundance. Yes, miracles call for helpers. Mothers who will insist on giving Jesus a place and a purpose at the feast, and servants who will dare to deliver water-made wine. Jesus will do the rest. And he's still counting on us to do what only we can do. What about it? Does God want to perform any miracles in this congregation? If so, who's willing? to become a miracle worker? Who wants to be a servant to bear the water made wine and participate with God as a worker of miracles in Macomb, Illinois?